Hello, everyone. This is the Gridiron Review, and we're going to be discussing ESPN's biggest questions, specifically at the quarterback position for all 32 NFL teams. With the Cowboys, does Dak Prescott get a contract extension? I sure hope not. Although, for a team that promised to leave this draft with a quarterback, they did not.
Yeah, the Cowboys promised that they were going to leave with one, and it sounded like it was going to be Max Duggan. And I don't know if it was just that Duggan got taken earlier than they thought or not, but this is a huge year for Dak Prescott. They've gone out and filled all the major holes, including bringing in Stephon Gilmore to replace bum-ass Anthony Brown. Um, if he can't be the leader that this team needs to make it to the Super Bowl and what is a significantly weaker NFC than AFC. I, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, it feels like the Cowboys could be in market for a trade for a vet after this year. I know like Dak Prescott has great regular season stats and stuff, but he has been abysmal in the playoffs, and I don't know how the Vikings keep playing with Cousins, and that'll be something we discuss in a little bit. But at some point, you have to just realize the quarterbacks like Prescott and Cousins are just regular season guys, and you're not going to win with them. Can Daniel Jones live up to his contract, and what are the implications if he doesn't? I say absolutely. I think Dable seems like one of those guys that can make almost anyone look really good. He got the best out of Josh Allen, as we saw with their first season without him. He took a little bit of a step back, and Daniel Jones had his best season by far. This contract is a lot. It was more than he should have gotten, but in 2 years, it might not be so bad, and he could be a steal. And even at the same time, it's only a 4-year contract. So if he doesn't live up to it, they probably can get out of it after 2 years. So I don't think this is one of those that you get stuck for a long time with.
The biggest factors for me and whether or not Daniel Jones can succeed is first off, it doesn't sound like there's been any real talks with Barkley since the franchise tag has been put on him. Assuming Barkley can stay healthy for a second straight season, you need to get him back under contract because having a running game was a huge part of what helps open up a pass game with what was a practice squad receiver room. And secondly is first off, who's going to step up, or are the Giants going to bring in an alpha? Because right now they probably have a 20-man deep room with a bunch of guys that haven't worked out at the previous teams. I mean, which one of these guys is going to step up and make a big impact like Hodgins did last year?
Yeah, certainly the wide receiver room has been improved from last year, but it's still not great. We hope Wandale comes back healthy. Jalen Hyatt was a steal in the third, but none of these guys scream bona fide number one like Stephon Diggs was in Buffalo. So, look for the Giants to not be done making a move. Maybe, a 2-year plan where this year they just work with what they have. And hopefully Waller stays healthy and can be that presence for now. And then they readdress it next season and continue to add around him. But yeah, I think he can live up to the contract. I think it was a little shocking when they signed it, but then the more you look at it, I think it's really not that bad of a deal. Is Jalen Hurts set up to get back to the Super Bowl and win it this time? Set up to get back? Absolutely. The Eagles defense is starting to look borderline historic, in my opinion, and I think Jack would agree there. We expect them to add someone else to the linebacker room, and we may talk about that in another video. Miles Jack is still – there's still a lot of linebackers in free agency. They could swing a late-round pick for someone that you wouldn't expect. Somehow he ends up with Devin White on his team next to Kobe Dean for pennies. Not that that would actually happen, but yeah, I think the Eagles should run the NFC. It's really still pretty weak considering, versus the AFC. As far as winning it, I don't know. I mean, they have as good a chance as anybody.
Yeah. I mean, the Eagles somehow managed to basically retain the whole team. So everyone that contributed to them making a Super Bowl this year, all they did was add to it. It's on Hurts to continue to get better, or at the very least, just not revert to his old ways.
Yeah, and it's one thing I'm kind of curious about is how the offense is going to look without Shane Steichen there. But you just got to follow the blueprint of last year. I mean, at no point was that offense really sputtering. And I think despite not adding another receiver like they should have, they have a really great, probably a better running back room than last year, adding Rashad Penny and DeAndre Swift along with Gainwell. And you can, all those guys catch passes, so you can get creative with it. Yeah, I think Hurts is set up to get to the Super Bowl, but winning it, it's not easy to say. I mean, they're probably a Quez Watkins drop away from winning it last year, so you just don't know when the moment gets there. Washington, is Sam Howell really an NFL starter, and what are the implications if he isn't? Yes, he is. I don't. He shouldn't have been a fifth rounder. Almost everyone agrees with that. The little bit that he showed was positive. He's got a really good arm. He excels at the deep ball. He's a punishing runner. I don't see how he doesn't start. Is he going to be amazing? I don't know. I mean, he was our quarterback one last year, ahead of Kenny Pickett, and we stand by that still. He should be a godsend for Terry McLaurin, finally getting a guy that can throw him the deep ball, as we saw in the one game that Hal played. Brissett is a great backup in case he doesn't work out. The implications are Ron Rivera gets fired, and the new regime may be looking at Caleb Williams or one of the guys next year.
I agree with Zach in that Howell is an NFL starter. I think, I mean, obviously we didn't feel like he should have fallen in the fifth round whatsoever. But one of the things that we've talked about on several other podcasts is how guys like Zach Wilson are never fully developed because they never get a chance to sit behind a veteran who can actually teach them anything whatsoever. So, yes, Wentz is not liked amongst the NFL community. Howell is probably could have started for the Commanders last season, but him sitting an entire season and learning from a vet who, at one point, people forget, did lead the Eagles to an undefeated record. Like, it's the best thing for him, and we could see Howell thrive this year just strictly on the basis that he fell and sat like most top quarterbacks need to.
Yeah, and also besides Wentz, there's also Taylor Heineke, one of the better backups in football that he got to learn from as well. So I definitely agree. Like, he wasn't thrust into action, and again, the little bit we saw was positive. It was the best the offense looked that season, and I think he absolutely is an NFL starter. And again, the implications if he isn't, Ron Rivera is probably fired, and the new regime gets one of the guys next year. Even though I don't think that's going to happen. Did the Bears do enough to improve the grip around Fields? Absolutely. I think the Bears in general had an amazing draft. The only thing they didn't do well is draft or outside pass rushers. But getting Chase Claypool, I know a lot of people dogged them for that trade, but with him not having to be, there wasn't much there last year. I know Darnell Mooney, but he's still a day 3 pick. Getting DJ Moore, absolutely. Nate Davis, Darnell Wright. I mean, I don't even know. Like, this may be just them trying to find a question. I think the answer is clearly yes.
Yeah, Chicago had one of the best off seasons. I know we did a series about that last year, but we'll potentially go into that at some point. The only thing that I know personally I've mentioned multiple times is that they definitely could have added more to the lineman room. Obviously, Nate Davis and Darnell Wright are huge pickups for them, but they definitely could have added more to the room.
That's true. I mean, you would have loved to see maybe a couple day 3 picks. The guy, DeJuan Jones, was there. There was a lot of linemen that fell that you could have argued they should have taken, but they clearly made a great stride forward. At least you could more put it that way. And look, it's not fixed overnight. So they did everything they could to fix it this year. And, maybe a vet offensive lineman is cut that you don't expect, or, there's still a lot that could be done. Is Jared Goff good enough to lead the Lions to playoff success? I think the answer is yes, but as far as like Super Bowl, maybe. I think the playoff success, because the NFC is so weak, because the Lions are building an interesting team, I think they can win their playoff game, a first playoff game in a long time. But is he good enough to continued success? I think it's possible. I don't think it's an obvious yes or an obvious no.
For me, I would say yes, he's good enough. Again, Super Bowl, I don't know, but for me, like I know the first thing um, when it comes to like quarterback play is like you can't have all the drama around you. Like you need a team who's going to support you, and through it all, like despite them even drafting Hendon Hooker, the Lions have been nothing but supportive of Goff since he came in. And secondly, their success really relied heavily on a porous defense in their losses. Jared Goff's not playing defense, and Detroit did add a lot to their particularly secondary this year, so they should expect big things this year.
Agreed. Is Jordan Love ready? I sure hope so. I'm a big believer in Jordan Love. The little bits over the years that we've seen shows progression. And I really don't think the Packers would have so early on dismissed Rodgers if he wasn't. Rodgers gave him his blessing, clearly, showing more growth than Brett Favre did in that same situation. And yeah, I think we won't really know until it's time, but I would assume he is. Otherwise, you don't get rid of a recent MVP, multiple winner if you don't feel confident that Jordan Love can at least be good.
Yeah, Love has all the physical tools to succeed. And going back to the Howell point is like he's had not just one, but he's had multiple years to sit behind what is probably a Hall of Fame quarterback. Um, and in the Eagles game that he played in, like he looked good. Like Zach said, the spurts that you see over like more recently has looked better than not.
Yeah, and I hope Jordan Love, I know we've said this before, I hope he becomes a reminder of like sitting first round quarterbacks is okay. Like if you sit them for 3 years, I know you don't get that,
Your
you might
money,
have some uncertainty with contract extensions and you don't get your first round value, but look, if Jordan Love takes over and they're able to sign him to a first contract that's not 40 million a year after this season, and he ends up being Pro Bowl, not even all pro, but even if he's a Pro Bowl level guy, that's worth the selection. I mean, it's a weird thing. Like Zach Wilson needed to sit. He needed to sit, and the Jets just didn't do it. And look how that worked out. Not saying Wilson would have turned out any better, but he wouldn't have turned out worse. And he may have learned, how to be in the NFL before this season or before his disaster of a season. So I really hope Jordan Love just gives a reminder that the early guys do not have to play right away. Minnesota, how much longer for Kirk Cousins and what's next for the Vikings? I think it's this season is it. I don't. I would have loved for them to have taken a different quarterback in this draft, someone that could have potentially been a developmental upside guy. Jaron Hall's not it. Dorian Thompson-Robinson and Clayton Tune were two of our favorite quarterbacks in this draft, and they were both there, and the Vikings passed on them. Now Clayton Tune is looking to possibly play right away for Arizona due to injuries, and he could be the Brock Purdy this year. I know Arizona's looking at him and hoping he is, and obviously, as Jack and I talked about last night off camera, every team wants their guy to be the Brock Purdy. But in this situation, Clayton Tune and DTR, everything lines up. They're good athletes, good arms, lots of production at college, and they could have been great picks for Minnesota. And we could have been saying, hey, DTR could be the guy. Clayton Tune could be the guy. But now what's next is going to be Minnesota reportedly, or maybe not reportedly, obviously it was all over the place, was in on Lamar Jackson. And if Cousins falters this year, I still think Minnesota is going to have a decent record, or at least a middle of the road record. So they're going to have to trade up for a quarterback if they want, or throw another dart at a veteran. I don't, it's hard to tell who's going to be available come next year, but I think this is the final season.
Yeah, we've talked about this off camera a ton. This has to be Cousins' last season there. Obviously, the Jaron Hall pick was not one that we liked, but you look at the class of quarterbacks coming out next year. Again, this is assuming they all come out. This is assuming that a lot of them prove a lot more that they have to prove. But it could be one of the deepest quarterback classes that we've seen in a very, very long time. If a lot of these guys end up having great seasons and improving off last year, Minnesota could be, even if they're mid to late in the first round, could be lined up to get a good quarterback. we've seen mocks already with Bo Nix landing there. Not that we're going to get into that now, but we do like that fit with Nix throwing to Jefferson.
Yeah, and we just like I wonder if passing on Hendon Hooker falling into the third. Now, look, we didn't have a first round grade on him, but at some point Minnesota could have taken him. At some point they could have taken another quarterback, and I don't see the Vikings having any more success than they had before, even with Jordan Addison there. And I don't see what they do if they have too good of a season in a way. Like they could end up they're gonna have to trade up or something. That's kind of Bo Nix. I like Jack said, we really love the fit there. And there's a couple other guys. Right now, the top 5 quarterbacks all have first round grades according to a lot the consensus. And while we don't have that, it doesn't mean they can't, experience a lot of growth and, like Jack said, have a great quarterback class looking at Minnesota. Atlanta, is Desmond Ridder really an NFL starter? Yes, but is he a great one? Probably not. And I think Atlanta's problems are going to be more about Arthur Smith. The drafting of Bijan Robinson was not a good pick. And what's the point of taking a guy like Drake London, like Kyle Pitts, if you're just going to try to do the Tennessee offense that doesn't work? Even with Derrick Henry, most likely Hall of Fame running back, they had regular season success and would always falter in the playoffs. So I think Ridder is not in the best situation to succeed. And I think Arthur Smith is on the hot seat officially, or at least it's nearing that point where if they have another bad season, you could see him out. And then again, Atlanta, another team that might be looking at another quarterback. Also, I believe there was a report that surfaced that Atlanta was close to acquiring Kyler Murray. And I don't know if there's truth to that, but clearly, a lot of conversations around Lamar, a lot of conversations around they met with quarterbacks for the draft. They must not feel that Ridder is a sure thing. So I think he is a starter, but how good he is, I don't know that he's going to be anything special.
Yeah, kind of building off what Zach said is like, is he a starter? It's really hard to say on the small sample size of last year. Is he a starter in what Arthur Smith is trying to do? Yes. Um, it's similar to Tannehill. Like he's gonna throw when they need him to. Is it gonna be perfect? Probably not. They're gonna lean on the committee of running backs with Algier, Bijan, even Patterson. But the fact that there's even rumors, whether it's true or not, of them looking at Tannehill or looking at Kyler, shows you more about that Ridder either isn't ready or isn't going to be the guy within the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I mean he could take an unexpected step forward, but Arthur Smith's offense doesn't require the quarterback to do a lot, so they may just feel that Ridder can do what they require to be, average regular season team. If they make the playoffs, won't do much. Can Bryce Young have a Joe Burrow-like effect in Carolina? No. You can't. These aren't the same situations. I mean, Heisman winner, number 1 overall pick. That's great. Joe Burrow had a historic season at LSU, and he's not tiny. And I know, we don't really care about the size of Bryce Young. Our issues weren't with his size. But, man, the videos coming out of him standing next to his O-lineman are at least bad press. And I think Bryce Young can be a decent quarterback for Carolina, but not a Joe Burrow level guy. He's not going to suddenly, in our opinion, now we could absolutely be wrong, and in my opinion, he is not going to just magically turn this team around to become competitors in the NFC. I think they have a good defense. They have actually a great defense and a decent offense, but I don't think Bryce Young has the Joe Burrow-like effect, despite high character, smartness, maturity, all that. I just think the physical talent is not on the same level.
For me too, it's like, look at what Burrow's receiving room is. Like Young was not, they definitely did more for Young right before the draft with Chark and Adam Thielen, but to compare that to what Joe Burrow has, it's not even close.
Yeah, I mean, I love the Jonathan Mingo pick, but Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, these guys are above what Carolina has right now. So I don't, I think Young will be a fine quarterback, but as far as Joe Burrow, MVP level, taking them to the playoffs, no. I mean, Bryce Young can take them to the playoffs. I don't think he's going to have that effect. Can Derek Carr be more in New Orleans than he was with the Raiders? I think we're higher on Derek Carr than a lot of people are. It's kind of weird to see him getting a lot of the crap for Josh McDaniels' incompetence. Carr was an MVP candidate at one point. So I think Carr can be more in New Orleans than what they've had in recent memory. And I think Carr can take them to the playoffs. They have another team that's got a great defense. And, Derek Carr had John Gruden as his head coach, horrible drafts repeatedly. And Josh McDaniels is showing in his second stint as a head coach that he doesn't belong as a head coach. So, yeah, I think Derek Carr can at least be happier. And that could go a long way.
Yeah, I think when you look at the Saints offense, one of the things that they've lacked big time since Drew Brees' retirement is a true huddle leader, a true presence on the offensive side of the ball in a leadership role. And Carr can be exactly that. You can tell through his press conferences, like Zach said, he's happier. He's happy to be there. People in New Orleans are happy for him to be there. It seems like the city of New Orleans is excited about this season now that they have a non-Andy Dalton quarterback. And Olave can only get better. Michael Thomas, if he's able to stay healthy, Carr is relying on, the guys around him. But I think from a leadership aspect, he's what New Orleans has needed for the last few years.
Yeah. Tampa Bay, who starts? It's going to be Baker. Todd Bowles is another coach that's on the hot seat, and it's, in our opinion, white hot, considering how much this team took a step back after Bruce Arians left and Byron Leftwich was scapegoated. They're not going to start Trask. I would be shocked if it was. And I think Baker, we were talking about this recently as well, Baker is not going to be much worse, if not maybe a little bit better than what Tom Brady was last season. Brady was Brady, but that offense was not good. And I know he put up a decent season, and it's a shame to say it, but it wasn't just the offensive line. Brady's accuracy was off, and it was, a sad way for him to end his career. It's still a good season by most accounts, but I don't think Baker's going to be much worse. And Kyle Trask, I'd be shocked if he is the starter.
Tampa's in a weird situation where they're relying on either Kyle Trask or Baker Mayfield to lead this high-powered offense and to lead a team who very much is capable of at least being in Super Bowl conversations. And Tampa's a team that is just barely keeping it together right now. You would have thought that they would have gone for a veteran or something to at least show that they're trying to compete. Baker, in the last few years, has kind of been dragged through the mud. Trask has never really done anything. So, next year, if Tampa really screws it up this year, we assume that some of the pieces are going to start to get dealt. They're going to start to deal with the cap stuff. So you're drafting a young quarterback who is now going to struggle because there's not a Super Bowl caliber team there anymore.
Yeah, and it'll be a fresh coach, assuming it's an underwhelming season. Mike Evans is probably gone. Chris Godwin most likely gone. Devin White, Levante David, all the guys. This team could get a lot of assets by selling the farm or by selling their starters. But yeah, whatever rookie would be taking over, it's not going to be pretty. So what does the short and long-term future hold for Kyler Murray in Arizona? I'm of the personal belief that Murray's played his last snap in Arizona. I think the Cardinals are prime suspects to have that number 1 overall pick. And there's this weird thing on TikTok I think I saw, or it was a video somewhere that was talking about, what do you do if you're Arizona, if you have Kyler and you have the number 1 overall pick? And they were arguing you trade the pick for assets. And it's no. Caleb Williams is special. He's one of the best prospects. He's better than Kyler was coming out, in our opinion. And Kyler has not shown to be a good leader by any extent. And it doesn't seem like the players want to play for him. And I think you trade Kyler. You can probably get a similar package for him, not as good as the number 1 overall pick, but you can still get a lot for it. And, maybe there's also a surprise where Clayton Tune plays and ends up playing well. And that gives them an even more interesting conversation, such as 49ers this year with Brock Purdy and Trey Lance. I think short term, Kyler won't rush himself into the season. I don't think he plays this year. And long term, I think he gets dealt.
Arizona's in a weird spot with the Gannon signing, with the horrible roster that they have, with all the reports coming out about their facilities and players having to pay for food, or paying for everything for that matter. They have a lot to figure out. And I mean, Kelvin Beachum came out early in the offseason and spoke out against Kyler Murray. And then that just shows the type of leader that Murray is. It's a horrible reflection of him, and the guy that they brought in is not going to be useful to him in the slightest. Arizona should be expected to, and I think in most cases are projected to have the first overall pick. Deal Murray. It's not going to get any better. It's like if you brought in a quarterback guru, maybe, but you brought in Jonathan Gannon.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that they did have a very good draft, but maybe more than anything, you need your quarterback to be a leader. Again, as we mentioned, Joe Burrow, his number one asset is his leadership. Brock Purdy seems to have won over the locker room with his leadership as a Mr. Irrelevant. That's the impact that a good leader can have. You can get the team to believe. And I just feel like that's not Kyler. And it's just, it hasn't worked. And you just have to accept that it hasn't worked. So the Rams, how much longer for Matthew Stafford and what's next for them? I think this is his last year. I'd be shocked if he comes back for another season. I think it took a lot of convincing to get him back for this season alone. And Stetson Bennett, I think he's the guy, at least for a couple seasons. I don't think this is the only roster that might rival Arizona for crappiness. And they have a lot of problems. They had a great draft, a lot of guys that'll contribute early on, but this is one of those situations where if Stafford fails, if he gets hurt, if Bennett takes over and looks decent, then I think another team that's going to, Stafford will retire, McVay will leave, Donald will retire, Kupp will get traded. I think this could be an ugly couple of years for the Rams, but they got a Super Bowl. So I think the quick answer is this is his final season, and it'll be Bennett until they build a better roster. And maybe it'll be Bennett just in general.
So one thing that we've mentioned time and time again so far in this episode is how everyone is looking for their Purdy. And a conversation that we had off camera last night was who could be this year's Purdy. And obviously, like Zach said before, Tune came into the conversation. But Stetson Bennett could actually be this year's Purdy. Our conversation last night had to do heavily with could Brock Purdy have been a turning point in how you evaluate quarterbacks? Purdy, I know Zach wasn't a huge fan of last year from film alone, but when you look at the leadership aspect and the college production, look, Bennett didn't interview well, and as a Georgia fan, I've watched a lot of his interviews. It's funny to watch his interviews because he looks high most of the time, and I can understand why teams didn't like him. But there's a reason that the Rams took him in the fourth round, probably much earlier than most people, not us, expected. Bennett has an it factor. He's a leader. Look, Ohio State probably should have won the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. They were a field goal away from it. But look at the way that Bennett stepped up and rallied the team in the second half. If Stafford goes down, their plan is to try to not deal with the whole backup quarterback situation and just have someone that can plug and play, who knows how to run a huddle. And everything that we've heard about Bennett so far has been positive.
Yeah, he's looked really good in minicamp or rookie camp by all reports. And as the article states, a late round flyer. Bennett's not a late round flyer. That's not correct. Fourth round is not a late round flyer. This isn't a seventh round player. So I think Bennett definitely starts at some point this season, unless Stafford miraculously stays healthy for the whole year and the Rams get this magical season that no one's expecting. It really feels like Bennett is the future for now. And if he does decent, he should keep it. I don't see any reason. Yeah, his interviews are bad, but he seems like a decent leader. It seems like Georgia players all liked playing for him. And Jack's right. He put the team on his back against Ohio State, and he did that repeatedly over his career. So I think, and there's a reason he was able to hold off top recruits. That's something that you have to pay attention to. It wasn't like previous years when Justin Fields was sat for Jake Fromm. No, Bennett actually did well, and he beat out other guys that he shouldn't have. So that's just, everybody knocking on Bennett. You just got to see. So is Brock Purdy healthy? I don't know what I mean by with or Trey Lance. Can Sam Darnold still be a thing? Brock Purdy got his surgery recently, so he's probably missing most of the season. But again, the team rallied behind him, and you just can't. There's a reason the 49ers are committing to Purdy, even though he still had to get his surgery. Trey Lance, I think he gets traded after this season. I don't know. I think Sam Darnold's going to look the best he ever has under Shanahan because that's just what Shanahan does. And I don't know. I think I don't know if they're talking about like what's the situation going forward, but it's Brock Purdy. Otherwise, Trey Lance, maybe they play him a little bit to try and raise some trade value. But yeah, I think Sam Darnold looks the best he ever has, which isn't very difficult, but that's the Shanahan effect.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen reports saying that Purdy might miss the entirety of the season. So if that's the case, I think, and we've talked about this before, is like we could see both Lance and Darnold playing this year. Lance may not even make it in San Francisco through the whole year. If they can manage to get some tape of him early on, he could be a guy that's dealt to somebody who deals with an injury or a contender or something at the trade deadline. But Darnold didn't look horrifyingly bad at the end of last season. So if he can pick up where he left off, on top of being in a system that doesn't rely him to be Jesus Christ himself, he should be. The San Francisco 49ers should be fine.
Yeah, and we don't have any doubt that 49ers are going to be a decent team regardless. Lots of pass catches for Christian McCaffrey, we hope. So can Geno Smith do it again, and what happens if he doesn't? I feel like the answer is no. I mean, not in the same year that he had last year. I mean, he kind of fell apart in the playoffs, and I know it wasn't all his fault, but I think that with a year of film, he maybe figured out a little bit. Now, I'm not saying he's going to be a disaster, but I think there's two options going forward. I think, one, it could be Drew Lock sees some playing time, and two, if they do that bad, I think they were thinking about it this year, but Seattle will actually pull the trigger on a first-round quarterback because Pete Carroll said again that he really wished he had been able to do that, and he decided not to this season. The way the contract is set up for Geno Smith, it's a heavy front-loaded deal, and I think they can cut him after 1 year. So I think Seattle did a good job of protecting themselves in the case that he doesn't work out. But I think the contract also says that they don't have 100% faith in him either.
As I stated when talking about golf, is like the biggest thing is like just having the organization have your back. And it seems like for the most part, Geno has that. The biggest part for us in whether he's going to do it again or not is they don't have an offensive identity. They have a bunch of pieces, but they don't have an identity. So, I mean, if they decide that they want to go the running route, Smith obviously is going to take a step back. But we did see old Geno pop his head out in the playoffs. So it makes you wonder where he's going to pick up come August.
Yeah. Buffalo, can Josh Allen fix his turnover problem? I mean, yes, but I also think Allen is a gunslinger for a reason. I think you're going to have to live with his turnovers, and you're going to enjoy his specialness. Now, that being said, Dalton Kincaid in the red zone should help cut the red zone turnovers down. Like he threw, as it noted here, 14 interceptions. That's really not terrible. 5 in the red zone is bad. So I think like the more specific question is, can he fix the red zone turnover problem? And I think yes, I think he'll trim it down. I think Kincaid's a matchup nightmare in the red zone. So maybe even a more balanced offense should allow him to, roll out in space more rushing touchdowns for the running backs. Yeah, I think it's yes. Will he have less interceptions? No. Overall, I mean, will he have less red zone turnovers? Yeah, I think so.
I mean, from a defensive perspective, the easiest way to get a turnover is knowing that the team is going to throw. And Buffalo has kind of lacked an elite run game over the last few years. Obviously, they're hoping that Cook can turn the tide. But we really thought that they were going to bring in a power back like Roshan, and they're kind of stuck with just Damian Harris now. Um, so it will if they continue to sling it, the turnovers could continue to be an issue. Play action, stuff like that. Just being able to run can help limit turnovers, but it doesn't seem like that's very likely with them this year.
Miami Dolphins, can Tua stay on the field? No. I mean, the concussions are something that is going to only get worse. Um, it says it might be unfair to label a 25-year-old injury prone. Yeah, but guess what? That's what happens when you have multiple bad concussions and the whole concussion protocol gets overhauled because of you. So I think it's going to be an unfortunate story. I think it's going to be a what if with Tua. And it's a shame because lefty quarterbacks unite. But I really, really wish they would have drafted Holton Ahlers. We kind of talked about that, or at least signed him because it would be awesome to see a lefty back up a lefty. But I think this is a sad situation where the answer is unfortunately no. If it was physical injuries like his shoulder or his arm or you know bruised ribs, like just different stuff like that, I think it's a little more likely he would be able to stay on the field. But concussions are no joke, especially in the NFL. So I think one more, he's probably done.
Two is one concussion away from being forced into retirement. I think the question for the Dolphins has to be more, what is the answer at backup? Because right now I think it's just Skylar Thompson. You got to imagine they're looking at a vet, or they got to be looking at something. Um, for me, I don't know how Zach feels. Like Carson Wentz could be an option here, but really outside of that, it doesn't sound like Bridgewater's coming back. Not that he's been able to stay healthy either. Um, for such a high-powered offense, you would have thought that they would have looked for uh, a clear-cut backup. Not that Thompson can't be, but you saw his flaws come out in the playoffs.
Yeah, and I mean, heck, Trey Lance could be a trade option for Miami around midseason if Tua gets hurt, since McDaniel was there when they drafted him. So, yeah, this is an unfortunate one, and I don't think any fan of the NFL wants to see Tua get hurt again, especially after what happened last season. But it's not like concussion problems just suddenly go away. I think you're going to see Tua. This may be his last season, and he's going to be up there, with guys not in the same conversation, but guys like Luke Kuechly that retired way too early due to concussion problems. And it's unfortunate, but that's the NFL. Can Bill O'Brien save Mac Jones? Yeah, I think anybody could have saved Mac Jones from last year. I think the answer, I think the answer is yes. I think the better answer is if Belichick has a vendetta against Mac Jones now. There might be a real chance that Bailey Zappi is Belichick's guy just out of spite for Mac Jones. So I think Bill O'Brien can save the offense, and I think Mac Jones, if he plays, should look miles better than what that awfulness was last year. But I really feel like Mac Jones speaking out is going to cause some issues with Belichick as Belichick's legacy continues to tarnish year after year after the post-Brady breakup.
I think O'Brien can save the offense, but I think at the same time, he's also going to limit them. O'Brien was the least favorite coach on the Alabama staff. Many thought that he was what limited them to not making the playoffs this year. So I mean, Bill O'Brien has done it once in New England. I'm sure he can do it again, but I don't know where the limitations are with him coming back. But it doesn't seem like it's going to matter because McDaniels will probably be brought back next offseason anyways.
Yeah, that is a good point. Do the Jets have enough protection for Aaron Rodgers? I think they made. We've talked about their mistake this draft and that they should not have taken Will McDonald and should have gone with a different O lineman. Even Broderick Jones was clearly their pick and they panicked, but I don't think so. I'm a little surprised. They got lucky with Joe Tipman and Carter Warren, but I think they may be swinging a trade in the middle of the season for a better lineman.
The answer really has to do with whether or not Becton and Max Mitchell are ready to go and can stay healthy this year.
Yeah, that's going to be one of those we have to wait and see. Will Todd Monken's offense take Lamar Jackson to a new level of success? Yes. This is a clearly yes. And I know there's not much of another question you could ask here with the quarterback in Baltimore, but to think that Lamar has done this with Greg Roman's offense, that he's been this good with Greg Roman's offense, you can only imagine what a guy that has had one of the better college offenses in football can do as a coordinator for Baltimore. You're going to see a lot more 3 receiver sets. You're going to see a lot more multiple tight end sets. I know Baltimore did that a lot already, but Georgia featured their tight ends effectively and did it well, while also featuring multiple receivers, multiple running backs. It's the perfect fit, in my opinion, and I believe in Jack's. I think you're going to see less designed runs for Lamar and much more passing and off-script runs that should allow him to get better as a thrower. And Zay Flowers should do wonders for him.
The only part of that I disagree is I think that Monken is going to have design run for Lamar. I think when you look at the Georgia offense, he did a lot of creative stuff to get Bennett moving. And clearly Lamar Jackson is night and day a better runner than Stetson Bennett. I think he's going to bring a lot of the same creative parts to the run game for Jackson. Monken is obviously a huge upgrade on Greg Roman. I think he's still probably a year or two away, though, from having the set of weapons that he truly wants working with Lamar, though.
I would agree. And I didn't mean completely eliminate the design runs. I mean do less so that teams can't look for it nearly as much. Because at the point where last year, before he got hurt, it just felt like every team knew that there was a design run coming, and Jackson's rushing efficiency has gone down because the offense just didn't change. And now you get a real coordinator that has some creativity, as Jack mentioned, very creative offense. And I agree, this is probably the 3-year project to revamp this offense, but the early moves suggest a lot of upside. Getting Zay Flowers to pair with Rashad Bateman and the ghost of OBJ. Mark Andrews is Mark Andrews. We didn't see. Why am I blanking on his name? Oh my gosh.
Isaiah Likely?
No, the other one.
Charlie Kolar?
Yeah, Charlie Kolar. I expect to see more of him. And Likely, I didn't really care for, but hey, to each his own. Keaton Mitchell, UDFA signing, underrated signing. He's kind of a jack of all trades, kick returner. He's got a lot of speed. He could be used in a flexible role in the offense. There's just a lot to like about Baltimore this season, especially with Todd Monken. Will Joe Burrow's new deal leave room for others? It sure sounds like it. It seems like Burrow's going to sign a deal similar to Hurts did that pays him what he deserves, but also offers a lot of flexibility to keep other players. I would be shocked, based on the comments that have been made publicly, if Burrow signs some Kyler Murray mega deal with lack of flexibility for the team.
Yeah, I mean, Burrow's guy has been chased dating back to college. Higgins has been a big time. It sounds like Burrow is going to get paid what he deserves while leaving room for his guys. And it sounds like if they are strapped, it could be moving other pieces. Like it sounds like Boyd could be on the move to sign these other guys. So the money's going to come from somewhere else. Burrow and his guys are going to stay.
Yeah. Cleveland, this should be interesting. Can Deshaun Watson return to the 2020 version of himself at quarterback? Skill wise, yes, but I struggle to believe that he is leading the locker room. I have a hard time believing that whether what happened was true or not, and it certainly seemed like there was a lot of truth to it. I have a hard time believing players just dismiss that. I really do. So I think he can obviously be better than what he was in the limited appearances last season, but I think the Browns are going to continue to struggle because players aren't going to believe in him. And our bold prediction, or at least my bold prediction, is that DTRC snaps within the next 2 years. And because DTR is a great leader. So I think this Cleveland continues to make questionable decisions. I mean, we talked about this extensively, as did everyone. This was a bad choice. This contract was awful. And I think, yes, he can get better. I think it's easy to see where he would, but I think there's bigger questions here.
Yeah. The big question is what happens if he doesn't revert back to himself? Everyone gets canned, and it just becomes another Cleveland disaster. Big time pieces get moved. They go back to building a new jersey with 23 more names on it. But Watson, like Zach said, it really is hard to believe that, true or false, what happened, he is getting the support of all 53 guys in the locker room. And it sounds like there's still people coming out against him. So, like, he's got to find a way to keep his nose clean.
Yeah, so that'll be interesting to see how the distractions loom. Cleveland's going to end up starting a new rebuild before the previous one even worked. So, is Kenny Pickett the long-term answer? I think he's going to improve this season, but I think people are not understanding of just how painfully average, if that's even accurate, he was. I mean, everybody talked about him getting better over the last couple games, but it still wasn't good. It was low passing yards, not a lot of touchdowns. Now, we talked about this again recently. Matt Canada is the problem. And it's not fair to Pickett to assume that he's probably going to get blamed for some of these problems and Canada's going to be fired midseason. But they have done a decent job helping him out. They went and got Allen Robinson. They went and got Broderick Jones. They've done a lot. And I think he clearly takes a step forward. But to think he's going to be anything more than Trubisky-esque, I don't really think that's possible.
Yeah, I think just Pittsburgh fans need to be patient. And from all the Pittsburgh fans that I've talked to, they all understand that Canada is the problem. Pickett could put on a very average season this year, but as soon as Canada gets fired, there should be more promise for Pickett.
Did the Houston Texans have enough to support CJ Stroud? I think for his rookie season, yes, but there needs to be more eventually. Their offensive line should be one of the better ones and the most underrated, maybe even in football. Their receivers, Robert Woods, Tank Dell is not special. I know Stroud asked if they could draft him, but he doesn't offer much different than what they have already. They have a lot of slot guys. Dalton Schultz should be a really good signing for them, especially if they can lock him up for more than this season as it goes on. I think they're going to need to get a clear alpha unless like Nico Collins takes an unbelievable step forward because he does have the size for it. But yeah, I think for his rookie season, they have enough, but I think there needs to be more done over time.
Yeah, Stroud, I mean, they have a nice running back committee going on with Singletary and Pierce. That should take heavy pressure off of Stroud, especially with the newly built offensive line. Schultz is going to be similar to what he did in Dallas. He's going to be a reliable guy in the middle of the field for Stroud. Lacking in alpha, they have a ton of pieces in the receiver room. Unfortunately, about half of them are slot guys. So either they need to make a move for an alpha or just they're going to figure it out come next year.
Yeah. Will Anthony Richardson be ready? It sure seems like it. We were very high on him. I know that he was one of the most divisive prospects in recent memory, but as we've noted, and it was very easy to see, even at the combine, he showed much improvement from where he was in his college season. And he seems to be an excellent leader and an excellent interviewer. an excellent person. I mean, there's not many other words to describe his character. A report came out that they had an event. I don't know if it was rookies or if it was the Colts, and Richardson stayed behind to clean up when everyone else left. He didn't want people cleaning up for him. Very similar to the Georgia players that stayed after the combine last year. And I would be, I mean, it's a shame because we really like Gardner Minshew, but Richardson, I would be shocked if he doesn't win over the locker room and just command respect and following. He's shown, like we said, a ton of growth. He is a perfectionist, it seems. Like he's always going to keep trying to improve. And the rookie camp reports are sparkling. So I think Richardson will be ready. I think the other thing that we've kind of talked about and we've thought about is Florida seems to suck at developing players, at least at this present moment. Kyle Pitts was the highest player drafted for them in recent memory, and even he was more projection than production. Dameon Pierce was a great selection for the Texans on day 3. Guess what? He didn't play much in college. Anthony Richardson is going to be a much better pro than he was. So I think there's also got to be expected growth just from being out of that horrible situation that Florida is right now. So I think he'll be ready. Will he start right away? That may be a better question, but I think he'll be ready.
It's like the Jordan Love conversation. You can't be afraid to sit him. Like Minshew is more than capable of starting and holding down the fort. Indy's roster is in a position. So Indy's roster is in a position to win if they were in the NFC. They're in a very difficult AFC, so wouldn't even be favored to win their own division. So if you think even slightly that you need another year to build the roster, there's no issue with sitting Richardson whatsoever.
Yeah, that's a great point. Just because Richardson will be ready doesn't mean you have to play him. Nothing could hurt by sitting him, even if it's at least for half a season. Like the worst thing you can do is rush him out there before he's ready. So yeah, I would agree. I think he'll be ready, but it doesn't mean you have to play him. Is Trevor Lawrence ready to join the AFC's elite quarterbacks? Yeah, I think he's a dark horse MVP candidate. And it felt like towards the end of the season last year, he kind of already did. Not quite at the level of some of the other guys, but yeah, I think they added Calvin Ridley. That's only going to help. Yeah, I think this is an easy yes.
Yeah, the addition of Ridley automatically, despite all of the hate for the Christian Kirk contract, like he really did step up last year as one of Lawrence's favorite targets outside of Zay Jones. Adding Ridley should only open up Christian Kirk more. And another year in Peterson's system, I mean, you can't go wrong there.
And as this noted, they should have beaten the Chiefs. Like this was a team that could have easily made it to the Super Bowl had they been able to beat Kansas City. Tennessee, is the clock ticking for Ryan Tannehill? Duh. What's the soonest we could see Will Levis? I mean, the soonest we could see Will Levis is like halfway through the season if the Titans just have an inexplicably bad year. It should be next season, maybe like a final week of the NFL experience for him. I think the clock is clearly ticking on Tannehill. Anyone that says otherwise is kidding themselves.
Yeah, the trade rumors from this offseason alone suggest that Tennessee is no longer on the Tannehill boat. Regardless of whether it's Tannehill or Levis, this is very. Even though Arthur Smith isn't there anymore, this is very like Derrick Henry is the leader. Like they're the guy that the locker room supports. It doesn't matter really who's at the quarterback spot.
Yeah, and so it's their receiving weapons still aren't great. Treylon Burks is joined by 7th rounder, I forget his name, and Dow. Colton Dow, right?
Yep.
And Jacob Copeland, UDFA. Like there's just not a lot there. So I think Tannehill could get hurt, and you could see Levis because it certainly doesn't seem like it's going to be Malik Willis. Can Sean Payton save Russell Wilson? If Russell Wilson gets in his own way, and I think that clearly the offense should be better. I'd be shocked if it wasn't. And Payton certainly has that no nonsense way about him that that should consider or should right the ship with Russell Wilson. But as far as saving him, like I think he has a much better season, but I think Denver may be looking for another veteran next year. I'm a little surprised they didn't draft anyone. It really felt like they might. DTR, Stetson Bennett, both of them would have been perfect backups to Russell Wilson, and they didn't go that way. But I mean, he can, but whether Wilson is willing to change his ridiculous ways, I don't know.
Yeah, if anyone's gonna do it, it's probably Sean Payton. It seemed like the team culture under Hackett was horrifyingly bad. But this is going to be a huge determining year of whether Seattle was right about Russell Wilson or Russell Wilson proves them wrong. There were multiple conflicts on the Broncos sideline this year. Some caused or speculated caused by Russell Wilson. So he needs to, Sean Payton needs to come out and just fully support him. I don't know if he's done that yet or not, but you can't leave questions of whether Russell Wilson is your leader right now. That would be a decision that has to be made next year.
Yeah. Can Patrick Mahomes do it again with these wide receivers? I mean, I know there's probably not a better question out there, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, they mentioned that, Juju Smith-Schuster is gone, but Rashee Rice is at worst Juju Smith-Schuster. So Kadarius Toney, Sky Moore, Rashee Rice, MVS, Richie James, Justin Ross. Yeah, this is a good receiver room. I don't know why people act like it's not. And the only thing we wish they would have done is add another tight end, because Travis Kelce is not getting any younger. We know he's been lucky with injuries, but it would be nice to have seen Darnell Washington in that room or a day 3 tight end. But yeah, it's clearly going to be yes. Mahomes at this point could probably do it with the Giants receiving room.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about the Chiefs receiving room a little bit last night. I mean, they have pieces. This year showed that they don't need an alpha. No one in that room was an alpha. MVS will take the top off. Looking at the article. Tony and Moore are both good after the catch. Like, they're going to rely on Pacheco, the short game with McKinnon and Pacheco, Tony. They're just going to get the ball to their guys and let them do their thing. There's no reason that Mahomes got to sling the ball 70 yards every single play.
Right. And yet he could do it if he needed.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is going to be the same Chiefs. Their defense got a little bit better, so there's no reason to suspect they don't at least make it to the championship game again. The Raiders, can Jimmy G stay healthy? Who cares? It's the Raiders at this point. Like McDaniels, I don't think anyone wants to see him succeed. I know I don't, considering how dirty he's done Derek Carr and how he's continued the elite legacy of John Gruden by continuing to make the most questionable draft decisions, the most questionable roster decisions. What was the point of trading for Devontae Adams if you're going to get rid of Derek Carr? I mean, who cares? It's nothing against Jimmy G. The answer is probably no. And if not, then you got Brian Hoyer and Brian Hoyer Jr. and Aiden O'Connell, which is so much better. But the Raiders, McDaniels needs to be fired, and they just need to try again and stop going after established failure coaches and go after a young guy and just hope that it works out.
Yeah, they did nothing. The Raiders did more in UDFA to address their line than they did in the actual draft itself. They're setting Jimmy G up for failure, especially with not having talked to Jacobs about an extension whatsoever, or so it seems like. McDaniels has lost the locker room, and the Raiders sideline could be one of the ugliest in the league this year.
Yeah, I mean, the Raiders, this could be a disaster season. They're not, I don't think they're really talked about as being in contention for the number 1 overall pick, but they're going to get smacked by the AFC West. I mean, with a Sean Payton-led Broncos team, the Chargers, I mean, they should be okay. And the Chiefs, the Raiders, I would be not shocked, but I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't win a game in their division. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're just not a good roster. The offensive line is awful. The secondary is awful.
Yeah.
And The pass rush, Max Crosby is it. Tyree Wilson was a bad pick. I know a lot of people loved him, but we didn't. And you ignored secondary. You ignored almost all the offensive linemen besides Paris Johnson Jr. And you're gone. What? Like, it's just so head scratching. It's amazing that he didn't get fired. I think the only reason he wasn't fired is because the Raiders couldn't do it financially.
Mm.
The Chargers, can Kellen Moore take Justin Herbert to the next level? I don't know. Why is Kellen Moore held in this high regard? I like Kellen Moore, but I don't know. He helped Dak Prescott become a top quarterback. No, he didn't. Dak Prescott's not a top quarterback. Like, I don't understand this. Brandon Staley should have been another quarterback or coach that should have been fired. I don't know why he still has the job. I mean, the offense is probably a little bit better, but I guess Kellen Moore can take him to another level. But if you think that Dak Prescott is above Justin Herbert, I'm not saying that article suggests this, but Herbert probably has higher end skills overall than Prescott. No, he does. This is a weird way to phrase this description. Prescott is one of the most overrated quarterbacks in football, and Herbert physically should be one of the top 5. So I think clearly it can't be worse than it was, but the Chargers need to not waste Herbert's career and get rid of Staley.
I personally think that this is a dumb question. Whether you hold Kellen Moore in high regard or not, it has nothing to do with the offensive coordinator. This has all to do with the fact that Justin Herbert's weapons can't stay healthy if their life depended on it. Herbert has been throwing to guys like Joe Reed and Tyron Johnson, DeAndre Carter. Palmer isn't bad, but like when Palmer has to be a one, like Herbert has not had a healthy receiver room or a healthy set of weapons overall, I think, since he's come into the league.
Yeah, and they did add 2 receivers in the draft. Obviously, Quentin Johnston, and I think it's Darius Davis was the other one.
They added TCU's offense, essentially.
Yeah, that's true. And like, I think Herbert should take another step forward, but there's bigger problems here. That's not offensive coordinator. Like, it's amazing that Staley kept his job, because this team should be a very competitive team, and they're just somewhat competitive. But that concludes this coverage of the 32 big quarterback questions from ESPN. Keep a lookout. We're going to be doing a couple other article reactions going forward, we hope. And we're starting to post 2024 NFL draft content. Look at our quarterback videos and more. Thanks.